Game 1 ended in a draw. It was a Berlin defense. Game 2 also ended in a draw. It was a draw by repetition. Game 3 was the first win in the match, and it was for Hikaru Nakamura. This was the final moments of the game. Hikaru was white. He played knight c5. King went back. Carlsen moved his king back. Knight came back. Hikaru is okay with repeating. Carlsen comes back. Hikaru repeats. And now Carlsen tries to create things. He doesn't want to repeat. He goes king f7. But then knight c4 comes in. It's still okay because takes, and here bishop e7 is what the computer likes because that way the king doesn't lose any tempo and the knight could get trapped after knight b7, king e6. Instead, Carlsen played king e7 with the same idea, but the point is he wants bishop b6. But the problem with this is Hikaru has c5. He plays c5, bishop c7, and then c6. The black king cannot touch the pawn. He cannot come to this side. And the bishop cannot touch any of the pawns except for these two. Here, Carlsen was down to 2 seconds. He played bishop b6, trapping the knight still. Pawn f3, king e6, and now king f1. And this is where Carlsen lost on time. He must have just realized that the king is coming to the queen side. But black had counterplay. He had f5 and bishop f2. Like if the king comes closer, there was bishop f2. So it was still around equal, but Carlsen just lost on time. And Hikaru won this game and was leading the match 2-1. Game 4 ended in a draw. So Hikaru was leading 2.5 to 1.5. And then in game 5, Hikaru got a very nice position out of the opening with such active pieces. Carlsen kept pushing the a pawn. Here, Carlsen played pawn a3. He did not expect that Hikaru's play would be so strong. The correct thing would have been just rook a7 because there was pressure on the bishop and the pawn. There was pressure on c7. So if rook a7 defends it, for example, rook a7 you cannot really take because bishop e4, and now you will get the rook. You will be up an exchange. So that is why rook a7 would have been better, but Carlsen played a3, and now Hikaru played the beautiful knight g5, threatening mate, forcing an exchange basically. So takes, rook b8, and now Hikaru just picked up the c pawn. Takes on b2, queen takes back. So Carlsen had some play because of the pin with moves like knight c5, but Hikaru managed it so well. He just picked up one more pawn, just taking the bull by its horn. And knight e6 attacking the rook, rook just came back. And here Carlsen was already worse because the pin is not really that problematic. There's always rook b6. And Hikaru had to just consolidate and he went on to win this with his extra pass pawn on the a file. He's basically up 2 pawns. So this is what happened, and Carlsen resigned here. So Hikaru, after 5 games, was leading 3.5 to 1.5. A good lead, a good 2 point lead at the beginning of the match itself. Game 6 ended in a draw. In game 7, Hikaru played white and Carlsen went for King's Indian defense, a desperate way to get back in the match. And that backfired. Hikaru is basically an expert. He has been playing King's Indian for a long time. And Hikaru in this position played knight f5. He had castled long, and now it's a game of attacking the king. Whoever attacks the king first wins. Black is preparing b5. White has already played knight f5. Queen moves, takes, f4, gaining space, and b5. Takes, pawn d6. This is a very nice move by Hikaru. The idea being he gets the center square for the knight. And now takes. If pawn takes back, there was rook f1 and knight f6 was coming. So black played knight e8 and now just takes. Takes and takes. Bishop e6. Here, Hikaru could have just played e5 and kept his nice pawns, but he played queen takes e5. Knight takes and now e5. The idea being knight f6. The Carlsen went for counterplay with rook b5, and then knight f6 came anyway. Point being, if queen takes knight, queen takes rook, and Hikaru would be up in exchange. So Carlsen played king g7, allowing Hikaru to pick up the piece, but Carlsen thought there is counterplay on the b2 pawn. He was right, but he had to keep the queens. He should have kept the queens, and then there is enough play for black on the white king. But instead, he played queen takes d6, rook takes, and then rook b8. Here the problem is Carlsen did not expect Hikaru to find the next move. Hikaru just eliminates a nice bishop. Hikaru is basically saying, I don't want the extra piece. I just want a piece and a piece for a rook, a bishop and a knight for a rook, which is winning enough. And now after rook d1, Carlsen just lost on time. Rook d7 was coming, and it was completely winning for Hikaru. So after 7 games, Hikaru was leading 5-2, a huge lead. Game 8 was a shocking game because it was White who was pressing. Carlsen was in a better position out of the opening, and he kept pressing. Look at the pieces. White pieces are also active. But here in this position, Carlsen played the calm queen b5, not aware of what could happen next. Hikaru stunned Carlsen with knight f4, and it just lost for White. Because if you take queen g4 check, and when king moves, just queen takes knight and rook c1 is unstoppable. If you go queen b1, then just pawn d3, and then the pawn decides things. White's rooks are caught napping over there on the queen side. So after knight f4, Carlsen just played king h1, but then after queen h3, he just resigned because now it's lost. You take, I take the knight. So after 8 games, Hikaru enjoyed a 4 point lead. 6-2 was the score. Game 9, the last game of the 5+1 segment of the match, was a thriller. Carlsen's queen got caught out in the opening. It exploded too much. After a3, queen went to c4, and then Hikaru unleashed knight d5, basically forcing Carlsen to give up the queen. Because if you simply move the queen, the bishop hangs. So Carlsen went for pawn takes, and then rook takes. So basically, it is a queen against rook and bishop, winning for white. h3, rook e8, rook e1, rook c8, knight e2. Bishop moves, knight c3. So Hikaru is consolidating. Carlsen has some compensation, takes, and queen f4. Rook e5, queen h6. It's still queen against a rook and bishop. Takes, and bishop e4 check. King moved away, and then rook c5. So now Carlsen has got some play, but still white's winning. Queen f6, rook d5. Carlsen is preparing to get the rook to d2, and then one more rook to d2. That's his plan. Queen f7, king moves in. And here Hikaru played f6, preparing to push the pawns. There was a winning move in this position. Carlsen had bishop g6, winning the queen. Because if you take it, then just mate. Rook takes, and then king moves, there was mate. Okay, almost mate. You will have to give up the queen. Completely winning. But after f6, Carlsen played the next move in a second. He didn't stop and think because already he's on tilt. He's not used to losing like this. So rook d2. He was preparing to get the rooks in. He goes for that. Hikaru just goes queen c7. Rook b5. The rooks are coming in. And now rook takes bishop, allowing the repetition. And Carlsen took it. Instead, if Hikaru wanted, instead of rook takes c4, he could have defended. For example, just queen e7. If rook b2, you can just play queen takes bishop, and you're covering c2 square. So there is no repetition. So this was possible, but Hikaru settled for the draw, and that ended the 5+1 segment of the match with a 4 point lead for Hikaru. The score stood at 6.5, 2.5.